Good morning, and I'd like to call this hearing of the House Subcommittee on Transportation and Public Assets, Subcommittee of Government Oversight and Reform Committee to order. Welcome everyone this morning. Pleased to have everyone with us, especially our ranking member. Congresswoman Duckworth is with us for her first hearing. Congratulations to her on arrival of her daughter and getting through her maternity leave and rejoining us here. I know she's been back a little while, but this is her first hearing with us, and I was delighted to hear when she was selected to be the ranking Democrat member on this important subcommittee. I look forward to working with her. In just a minute, too, I'll recognize her for opening statement, but very pleased to have you, and I think we'll have a very productive 2 years working together. But again, welcome, everyone. The title of today's hearing is Preventing Another Malaysia Air 370 and Setting International Standards for Airline Flight Tracking. The order of business today will be, we'll start with opening statements, and usually the order is the chairman, the ranking member, other members who wish to be heard. And today we have sort of dueling hearings. There must be 10 of them going on right now, all at the same time. So we'll have members who may come and go or who want to be part of the hearing. We also are joined by Congressman Jimmy Duncan, and I think Mr. Price may be joining us, and we'll have unanimous consent for those joining us who aren't on the committee or the subcommittee to participate at the appropriate time. So with that, we will, after opening statements, we have a panel of 3 witnesses and welcome them this morning. I'll introduce them. We'll swear them in and hear their testimony. And after we hear from all 3, then we'll go to questions. So that'll be the order of business today. So with that, my opening statement, let me begin. At today's hearing, we're going to look at recent work between international and domestic entities to close the tracking gap, as well as discuss future advancements in technology that will result in real-time tracking that can immediately alert authorities to any abnormalities during the flight of a commercial passenger aircraft. Let me say at the outset, it's absolutely unacceptable that today we are unable to locate or properly track a commercial passenger aircraft. Today, it's unacceptable that any passenger aircraft with 239 people cannot be located in an accident that occurred some time ago. So I believe that it's our responsibility to ensure that no commercial aircraft with passengers should be allowed to fly without a working and operable aircraft tracking device. And today's hearing will focus on where we are in that process. There are great implications to the problem of not being able to track aircraft even after an accident, but also now when I visited ICAO and met with some of their officials, and I had one of the concerns they expressed is the expansion of the international conflict zone. To date, a couple of years ago, fairly limited in some of the Middle Eastern states. Now it's greatly expanded over continents, over regions, and commercial passenger aircraft are flying in these areas. We should be able to know where they are. We aren't going to address today the shoot down of another passenger aircraft, but if we don't take steps to know where an aircraft is at all times and properly route them against danger, and not just know where they are when they're lost, there will be consequences. And I predict that there will be additional shoot-downs of a passenger aircraft because we don't have these systems in place. A required and working global aeronautical distress and safety system standard is long overdue. Last year, after Malaysia Air 370, we had a hearing in the Transportation Committee. A number of issues were brought up that we had to address, and one that I cited back then and brought attention to the committee and the Congress was the need for action in getting, tracking capability of passenger aircraft. This, I might remind everyone, is 2015, and the technology exists, the capability exists. What we are lacking in is a standard for all of these operating passenger aircrafts across the globe. I was very pleased to meet last year with Michael Lawson, and he's the United States ambassador to ICAO. And upon our very first meeting, we discussed this issue, and he's with us here today. Most folks don't know what ICAO is. I was explaining it to staff, and when I became chairman of aviation in 2001, I didn't know what ICAO is, but ICAO is the primary and principal international aviation organization responsible for setting aviation standards, requirements, and protocols. That's for all aircraft flying across the globe. We have 191 nations who belong, and if you visit their headquarters in Montreal, I think it's bigger than the United Nations operation in New York City. Every country sends ambassadors to ICAO representatives. They have a general assembly or count, and then they have different layers of governance, and they set the standards for all aircraft. We have with us today Congressman Duncan, and he is, with Mr. Price, have introduced U.S. legislation, and I have a copy of their legislation, H.R. 772, which actually, having read it just in the last day or so, it complies with the standards or refers to the standards as set by ICAO to require certain standards that the U.S. aircraft adopt, and we'll turn to him for a better explanation shortly. But even if we can't pass this U.S. law without having the ICAO standards, American passengers could be protected, say, domestically with a domestic commercial flight if we passed it for the United States. But once they get outside our borders, ICAO is the primary responsibility, has the primary responsibility for standards setting. I've worked with IATA and met with their representatives, a very responsive International Air Transport Association, and that is an airline organization. They can set standards for their airlines, but they don't set the global standards, and they can require compliance of their membership. So that's why it's important for ICAO to act. Interestingly enough, you may not know this, but the United States provides about 25% of the funding for ICAO, so we have an important stake there. We have a great representative who's been working with folks. And not too long ago, when I traveled to Montreal, arranged a meeting with the president of ICAO to express our concerns on behalf of Congress of adopting that standard, moving that process forward. If we sometimes think the Congress or the Senate is slow, sometimes the international organizations, getting 191 countries to agree, that can also be time-consuming and difficult process. But I can't say that we could have had better representation than our ambassador has given us to that organization, or better cooperation. And I want to today hear an update. There was a recent meeting, and I believe today we're going to have an announcement on some of the standards being proposed that just were released, and we may hear more about the status of that. I think it's in draft. And then the important thing is the time frame for implementation. The fact is the technology does exist. The fact is that the technology is on most aircraft. What is lacking is a standard. There is an opportunity, I think Mr. Duncan's bill provides for it, for enhancing some of the capability of the technology. I met with Mr. Hart, NTSB, and we'll hear from them shortly. They are working with the industry to try to come up with a tracking device that is not only more reliable but also has a longer life and a better ability to track. And we'll hear the status of that. The long-term solution is, again, switching from a radar base to next-generation air traffic control with global and GPS tracking. So we know where every aircraft is that has passengers at every point on the Earth at all times, both for, in the case of an accident, and then also keeping the passengers safe in some of the zones I talked about that pose great risks. So we'll learn today the status of the adoption of these international standards. We'll look at the requirements for potentially longer life tracking devices and better technologies. We'll hear from NTSB and others, the industry also, who have comments on standards should be set that are reasonable and workable and implementable as soon as possible. So Flight 370, although a tragedy with the loss of life of 239 individuals from that horrible experience, and still today not being able to locate that aircraft or those victims, we have a responsibility act to move this process forward. Today there are approximately 90,000 flights around the world. The FAA estimates there are around 123,000 U.S. citizens boarding those planes every day. So while we can control domestic traffic and U.S. aircraft, it's important that international standard be there. We're looking at not just protecting citizens around the world, but our responsibility to U.S. citizens. And right now, the international standard is to check every 30 minutes when outside of radar. Of course, the long term is the next generation air traffic control. But listen to this, at 35,000 feet, a Boeing 747 has a cruising speed of 570 miles per hour. In 30 minutes, a plane can carry nearly 400 passengers, can travel nearly 300 miles before anyone knows where it is. That's not an acceptable standard today. So today we're going to look at finally the work between international, domestic entities, the industry, some of our safety organizations, and we'll hear where we are and where we need to go and how we need to get there. So with that lengthy opening statement, you'll find sometimes I use the chairman's prerogative, which I also always extend to the minority. I've often told my staff that whatever time the other side of the aisle needs, they're going to get, even if it requires that we get preparation H and sit here forever. But that's an inside joke. But welcome, Ranking Member Duckworth. Congratulations, and look forward to working with you. You're recognized.
And I thank the chairman. It is a joy to be here, and I was especially pleased to see that you were the chairman of the committee with your experience in transportation issue. So we opened, I get to have my first hearing back in Congress from maternity leave on an issue near and dear to my heart, which is airspace issue. I have flown as a pilot myself on 4 different continents. I've flown in Egypt, I've flown in Guyana, Iceland, and of course the United States. And I've found the airspace and the control of that airspace to be very different in each of those areas, depending on the sophistication of the system, the developed just the capabilities of the host governments in that area. So I, again, would like to thank the chairman for holding this hearing today. The hearing is critically important to determine what steps are being taken to improve the tracking of commercial international flights to ensure that all flights can be tracked in the event of an emergency. With Malaysian Airlines Flight 370's disappearance, after almost a year of what was the most expensive search operation in aviation history, the aircraft still has not been located. And I find this event to be especially tragic and upsetting. First, of course, our hearts, all of us, go out to the families of the 239 people that lost their lives. Not only did they lose a loved one, but they've been denied any level of closure because the aircraft and even its remnants have yet to be found. I can only imagine the pain these family members feel and continue to suffer each and every day. In addition to the disappearance of MH-370, the weaknesses of international flight tracking system has become very visible. Again, as a pilot, as a frequent flyer, member of Congress, O'Hare is my eastern border. I don't actually have O'Hare Airport in my district. Well, I have the fence and the grass where the geese that get in the flight path land and hang out, but I don't have the gift shops or any of the revenue-generating portions of O'Hare. I find it unacceptable that in 2014, an aircraft can go completely missing for such an extended period of time without any answers or explanations. With all the technology available to us, with GPS, satellite phones, the public wants to know, how can this happen in 2014? Pilots understand it a little bit better, but for the general public, they don't understand. And these are the people getting on airliners and trusting, that the system will be safe to carry their loved ones to their destination. Today, I hope to receive some answers. Our witnesses include organizations that have been on the front lines of improving flight tracking systems, as well as creating a unified system for international flight tracking. Now, I always called it ICAO, which is how we pronounce it in the Army. Is it ICAO or is it ICAO? ICAO. Okay, see, we were saying it wrong in the Army the whole time. Well, we're just a bunch of helicopter pilots. What do we know? So with ICAO, and the International Air Transport Association, the NTSB, have all been active participants in trying to find a solution to this problem. And I really want to thank you for the work you're doing. I look forward to fully examining this issue at great lengths today. I thank the chairman for his very kind and generous remarks. And I continue to look forward to working with him to monitor these issues in the future. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
How much? Oops. Thank you. Again, referred to his proposed legislation, and one of the experts in Congress on aviation, former chair of the Aviation Subcommittee in the House, Mr. Duncan, gentleman from Tennessee. You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for calling this hearing, and thank you for your very supportive comments about my legislation. As you mentioned, I did chair the Aviation Subcommittee for 6 years, from 1995 till 2001, and then you followed me in that position, and of course later chaired the full committee. And you always have had a great interest and concern about aviation issues, and certainly that's evident here. And you're calling this early hearing in your chairmanship of this subcommittee. I did. This is an issue that I've been interested in for a long time. In 1999, under the chairmanship of Jim Hall, the NTSB issued a safety recommendation calling for 2 sets of black boxes on commercial aircraft, and I'm pleased that former Chairman Hall is here today. And as late as a week before last, a working group of the ICAO organization issued a recommendation that deployable recording boxes be put on commercial aircraft in the very near future, and that's exactly what my bill, H.R. 772, calls for as well. And certainly one of the lead witnesses here today is our ambassador to ICAO, Ambassador Lawson, and we're pleased to have all the witnesses here. My bill is entitled the SAFE Act, and it requires that manufacturers install deployable recorders on all aircraft ordered after January of 2017. And these deployable recorders would contain both voice and data information, and they would automatically eject from an airplane upon a crash, and thus could save untold millions of dollars in searching costs, and would certainly be a great step forward in trying to solve the problems related to all these to various aircraft crashes and so forth. And we're really way behind the times on this. I have a report here that says deployable recorders have been used in military and overwater helicopter applications since the 1960s and are currently available from several manufacturers. They combine traditional FDR and CVR functions into one unit and are capable of providing a comparable amount of flight data. So I think that we're well past the time that this should have been done, and I'm encouraged by all the support that is coming both here nationally and internationally for my legislation. And then Congressman Price, one of our most respected members, has introduced companion legislation, H.R. 753, which goes right along with the bill that I've introduced, and hopefully we can get some progress in this Congress in that regard. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for calling this hearing and for allowing me to make these brief comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Amash, did you have an opening statement? Okay. Any other members? Recognize Ms. Duckworth.
Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a statement from Congressman Price for the record, and I'd like to submit.
Without objection, be made part of the record.
Thank you.
And we'll leave the record open for a period of 10 legislative days for additional comments or questions to the witnesses without objection, so ordered. All right, there are no further opening statements at this point. I would like to introduce our panel of witnesses. We're very fortunate today to have with us the United States Ambassador to the United States Mission of ICAO, Ambassador Michael A. Lawson. We have the Honorable Christopher Hart. He is the acting chair of the National Transportation Safety Board. And we have Mr. Kevin Hyatt, and he is the Senior Vice President for Safety and Flight Operations for the International Air Transport Association. Some of you have been before us before. If you haven't, this is an oversight and investigative panel. We do swear in our witnesses, so if you would stand, raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that your testimony before this subcommittee of Congress is the whole truth or nothing, and nothing but the truth? Let the record reflect that the witnesses answered in the affirmative. Again, welcome to each of you. Be seated. What we do, we don't have multiple panels. We don't have a huge number of witnesses, so we can be flexible on the 5-minute rule. So we do want to hear your statement. If you have lengthy information or background that you want to submit to the record, just a simple request to the chair, and we'll make certain it's inserted in the record appropriately. With that, well, let me welcome and again thank our ambassador, Ambassador Lawson, who's been great to work with on this issue, and we'll hear his testimony today. Welcome, sir, and you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Micah, Ranking Member Duckworth, and other members, distinguished members of this subcommittee. I appreciate the opportunity to testify in front of this committee regarding efforts to accelerate the establishment of international standards relating to the tracking of commercial airliners over oceanic areas in response to the recent loss of Malaysia Flight 370. As U.S. Ambassador to the International Civil Aviation Organization, this issue is one of my highest priorities. International responses to complex challenges have historically been frustratingly slow. However, in the aftermath of the MH-370 tragedy, the international aviation community has responded with an appropriate sense of urgency. Weeks after the MH-370 disappearance, ICAO convened a special multidisciplinary meeting to study issues related to global airline flight tracking. The meeting concluded that there is a need to accelerate the existing timetable to track aircraft effectively and globally, and that the solution would have to involve more than the introduction of technology. A comprehensive approach that involves the coordination of airline industry practices, air traffic control procedures, search and rescue capabilities, and accident investigation processes would be required. In the following months, an industry-led task force was formed to focus on what airlines could do to support flight tracking in the near term, while the ICAO working group developed an overarching concept of operations. The ICAO concept broke the tracking problem down into 4 items: normal tracking, abnormal tracking, distress tracking, and retrieval of accident data. These 2 groups, industry and ICAO, worked to harmonize their proposals, and on February 3rd presented their recommendations to a high-level safety conference attended by more than 850 delegates from over 120 states. The ICAO conference endorsed the operational concept. I would like to call your attention to the progress made in 2 key areas: normal aircraft tracking and retrieval of accident data. Normal aircraft tracking. An international standard for normal aircraft tracking has progressed rapidly. A normal tracking standard seems basic, but it will create the foundation upon which additional requirements will be built. ICAO's proposed normal tracking standard clearly assigns the responsibility for tracking to the airline. It requires that every operator track the location of the aircraft every 15 minutes when their aircraft are flying over oceanic airspace, unless air traffic control is providing surveillance. It also requires that airlines develop procedures to coordinate with air traffic control facilities in the event a position report is missed. We believe that these basic procedures would significantly improve search and rescue responses in the event another tragedy were to occur. The standards proposed by ICAO did not contain specific tracking technologies. Through collaboration with industry, an array of current and emerging technologies capable of meeting the proposed normal tracking standard have been identified. ICAO will be distributing their proposal to member states for review this week. ICAO will incorporate comments received from the states and offer the standard for adoption by the ICAO Council during November of this year. The planned global applicability date is November of 2016. A copy of ICAO's letter has been provided for the record. For the United States, FAA regulations already require some level of centralized tracking, and U.S. airlines have fairly sophisticated operational control centers capable of meeting this challenge. However, other regions of the world may find this standard more challenging. For this reason, ICAO will conduct a normal aircraft tracking initiative in Asia later this year. The initiative is designed to assist in identifying challenges with technology and procedures and help the industry gain operational experience. The FAA will be providing assistance and guidance and advice, and we expect U.S. airlines will participate. With respect to the retrieval of accident data, the proposed standards to address the recovery of cockpit voice and flight data recorders are also progressing rapidly. The standards will target the recovery of data following an accident. One possible method to facilitate recovery of post-accident data would be to mandate deployable flight recorders. However, during the recent high-level safety conference, industry and regulators from around the world urged ICAO to draft performance-based standards that would leave the door open to other emerging technologies, such as streaming data, which may be easier and possibly quicker to implement. ICAO has drafted the initial performance-based standards for accident data recovery. The standards will likely require changes or additions to aircraft equipment, and for this reason, it may take several years to implement them. The standards will also require the development of extensive guidance materials. Depending on the technological solution, the changes to aircraft equipment would be phased in beginning in 2019 or 2021. The proposal is not scheduled for adoption by the ICAO Council until March of 2016. Mr. Chairman, ICAO, with the support of the United States and the international community, has responded quickly to the challenge of global flight tracking. Standards that would normally take years of deliberation have been developed in months. The FAA and U.S. airlines are recognized leaders when it comes to the issue of aircraft trafficking, and as you know, the FAA has for years provided assistance to other regions of the world in their efforts to adapt their operations to accommodate air traffic management, and now they are being asked to assist with aircraft tracking. This is a great example of America's global leadership that should be encouraged and continued. It is my hope that the United States will continue to apply its substantial expertise towards the development and maturation of global aircraft tracking standards, and that any new U.S. regulations will be harmonized with the international standards that emerge as a result of our collective efforts. Thank you, and I look forward to hearing your concerns and answering any questions you may have.
Well, thank you, and we'll go to our next witness. Before we do that, I see Mr. Price, the gentleman from North Carolina, joining us, and I'd ask unanimous consent that he be permitted to participate in the panel, and he would be recognized after other members. Welcome. Sir, please take a seat, and you're recognized. You will be recognized without objection, so ordered. Now, let me introduce, and again, thank also for his hospitality, Mr. Christopher Hart, the acting NTSB Safety Board Chair. And if members and staff have not gone down to their operations, I went down actually to look at some of the retrieved equipment from the site of the Metro arcing incident where one person was killed, and they bring some of the parts and debris to their lab downtown here. But I also got a chance to visit upstairs and several of the labs where they have airline crash, black boxes, the remains from different crashes. I saw even a bus tire in another lab, and the sophisticated equipment and work that NTSB does in investigating a whole host of accidents. If staff or members have not gone, please go down and see the incredible job that they do. But thank you for your hospitality. I know I was there and some of our staff, but again, on the work you do. So welcome, Mr. Hart, and you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Micah, and the pleasure was ours to have you come and see what we do, because we're proud of it and we love to show it off. So good morning, Chairman Micah, Ranking Member Duckworth, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me to testify today on behalf of the NTSB. From the start of the Air Safety Board in the Civil Aeronautics Act of 1938, Congress directed that the board, quote, reduce accidents by conducting studies and investigations on matters pertaining to safety in air navigation and the prevention of accidents, end of quote. In the history of aviation, recorders and the wealth of data they provide are the technology that has most helped the NTSB and our international counterparts achieve this objective of preventing accidents and improving safety. Without them, we are unable to determine what really happened, as was the case during the 2 years that the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder remained underwater after the crash of Air France Flight 447. Recorders significantly enhance our ability to determine what happened, and from that, to make recommendations to prevent recurrences. From the early days of the NTSB, we have recommended that recorders be more robust because of the lessons learned in our safety investigations. And today, more than 40 years later, we are again asking for more improvements to recorder technology. Last month, we asked the FAA to require that commercial aircraft operating more than 50 nautical miles from shore be equipped to transmit their location within 6 nautical miles in the event of a crash, and to require that these aircraft be equipped with a low-frequency location device that will transmit their underwater location for 90 days. We also recommended a way to recover data without requiring underwater retrieval, and that all of these requirements be harmonized internationally. Also, accidents such as Silk Air and Egypt Air remind us that seeing what is happening in the cockpit would help us know much better the totality of what happened. So the NTSB also recommended that cockpits have image recorders to capture that information for 2 hours. These recommendations are not about gotcha moments, they are about learning and improving safety. Earlier this month, I participated in the high-level safety conference at ICAO that's been referred to previously with my colleagues who are here today. At this meeting, the ICAO member states considered a way forward to dealing with the issue of tracking aircraft in real time. The tragic events over the last year have focused the entire international aviation community in developing new standards. The conference proposed the development of performance-based standards to improve tracking, locating, and data recovery, as you've already heard, and similar to what the NTSB proposed in our recent recommendations. The ICAO proposals are a critical step toward the adoption of a performance-based standard. More work needs to be done, and the NTSB will continue to provide its guidance and counsel as informed by our investigation experience to our ICAO ambassador as that process moves forward. The NTSB and its international counterparts have concluded that in this day and age, lost aircraft and lost data from those aircraft should be a thing of the past. Thank you for holding this hearing on this important topic to advance aviation safety worldwide. I would be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you for your testimony, and we'll hear next from Kevin Hyatt, and he's the Senior Vice President for Safety and Flight Operations of IATA. Welcome, sir. Thank you also for your past cooperation, and you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Mica. Chairman Mica, Ranking Member Duckworth, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify on behalf of the 250-plus members of the International Air Transport Association, IATA, and on this very important issue of aircraft tracking. IATA's mission in the 70 years of its existence has been to represent, lead, and serve the global air transport industry. Our members account for 84% of global air traffic. IATA and its member airlines are committed to maintaining a safe and efficient international air transportation system. IATA member airlines have an exemplary safety record with 0.3 accidents per 1 million flights in 2013. Aviation is safe and remains safe because its culture is one of seeking continuous improvement. In 2003, IATA advanced global aviation safety with its introduction of the IATA Operational Safety Audit, known as IOSA, which is an internationally recognized and acceptable evaluation system designed to assess the operational members and management and control of systems and airlines. All IATA members are IOSA registered and must remain registered to maintain IATA membership. From 2009 through 2013, the accident rate for airlines on the IOSA registry was 2.5 times better than that for a non-IOSA registered airline. As such, IOSA has become the global standard, recognized well beyond IATA membership. As of October 2014, 154, or 38%, of the 402 airlines that are IOSA registered were non-IATA members. In 2014, commercial aviation experienced tragedies that remind us that we cannot rest on our safety record and that we must do all our best to anticipate the unanticipated, even if the possibilities are deemed extremely remote. We are nearing an infamous first anniversary of the unexplained loss of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, a state-of-the-art commercial aircraft operating in radar-controlled airspace. Soon after the disappearance of Flight 370, IATA brought together partners from across the aviation industry, including airlines, air navigation service providers, pilots, manufacturers, the Civil Aviation Organization, and many other key stakeholders to undertake a critical review of current and future aircraft tracking capabilities and identify near-term options to improve these capabilities. Throughout the summer and fall of 2014, this task force reviewed today's technologies, procedures, and best practices in terms of aircraft tracking. The task force found that most airlines track their fleets through a variety of means, including the vast majority who track through air traffic surveillance services, where they exist. We also verified that there are existing technologies, services, and procedures that can enhance aircraft tracking in the near term, and that a performance-based approach must be employed. There is no one-size-fits-all solution. Established procedures must be followed and, where needed, improved to ensure clear, consistent, and timely communications between air navigation service providers and the airlines. While the focus of the industry group was on the near term, it was recognized that emerging technologies will create new capabilities in the global air navigation infrastructure, including an improved ability to track aircraft. The task force report was provided to ICAO in early December. ICAO incorporated its findings into their Global Aeronautical Distress Safety System document, known as GADS. GADS is a concept of operation for routine, non-routine, emergency, and search and rescue situations. While these various stages are well defined in the GADS document, IATA is concerned with suggestions that our industry should implement unnecessary solutions in the near term that would be more effectively addressed as more effective technology solutions are implemented over the next years. For example, any deployment of automatic deployable flight recorders would be redundant for some airlines that implement real-time data streaming. On February 2nd through the 5th, 2015, ICAO held a high-level safety conference. The agenda from that conference addressed several key areas, including aircraft tracking, risks to commercial aviation in conflict zones, and sharing and protection of safety information. ICAO member states concluded that 1, international standards for aircraft tracking are needed, and 2, that a performance-based approach was appropriate when implementing these standards. IATA, along with other key stakeholders, will participate in an implementation initiative that will evaluate the feasibility of these proposed standards and provide guidance to both government and industry in terms of procedural gaps that may exist. IATA called on ICAO and its member states to move forward in such a way that does not result in premature, redundant, or unnecessary regulation. There are some who believe that new equipment is needed on board aircraft today to enhance aircraft tracking. IATA believes that the immediate focus should remain on leveraging the equipment already installed on aircraft. More importantly, IATA believes that there is an urgent need to ensure adherence to the existing, clearly defined roles and responsibilities of air navigation service providers for airlines. Airlines are responsible for safely and efficiently carrying passengers. Air navigation service providers are responsible for maintaining safe separation and monitoring their airspace at all times. Furthermore, the air navigation service provider is the controlling authority managing routine and non-normal situations. As an example, an aircraft may deviate off track for a number of reasons, such as weather avoidance, vectoring for traffic, or for situations far more serious. In all cases, this responsibility and resulting timely action remains with the air navigation service provider. Air navigation service providers are also responsible for initiating alerts and search and rescue activities. We believe that strict adherence to these roles and responsibilities will advance aviation safety more effectively and efficiently than layers of overly redundant mitigation. We also underscore the importance of these roles and responsibilities and procedural compliance not only throughout the implementation initiative, but as we continue to work with governments and other stakeholders to ensure the safety of global aviation. IATA and its member airlines recognize that commercial aviation is not sustainable if the public does not have confidence in the safety of the global air traffic system. The credibility of our industry is at risk when a modern commercial aircraft vanishes while under air traffic control, and that, in absence of the facts, speculation defines the accident. What the airline industry will never allow is speculation about its number one priority, the safety of its passengers and crew. Airlines remain committed to ensuring the safe and efficient operations of some 100,000 flights every day, and IATA will remain a vocal leader and strong voice in taking whatever steps are needed to honor this commitment. Chairman Mica, Ranking Member Duckworth, distinguished members of the subcommittee, on behalf of IATA, thank you again for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you, and thank all of our witnesses for their testimony. We'll now turn to some questions. First of all, Mr. Ambassador, I heard some time frames cited as to when ICAO would actually institute a standard. Now, probably the most basic standard, and we just heard Mr. Hyatt talk about a requirement. Well, first of all, about 95% of the aircraft already have equipment that has a transponder, so we could identify where the aircraft is, or some type of equipment where we have a transmitting device. Is that correct? Mr. Hyatt, is that correct?
Not for the exact number, but you are correct, a vast majority.
The vast majority, okay, so we have that. But the most simple thing would be to have a requirement in place as soon as possible that that be deployed. That equipment be deployed. I think on 370, it was not deployed. It was on the aircraft, but not deployed. Is anyone aware of that, whether 370 had that equipment? I'm sure it did. It was the most modern.
MH-370 was a Boeing 777, and it did have a transponder on board.
Yeah. But, okay, so we'll go back to the ambassador. My initial question is, when will we have in place even the most basic requirement that this equipment be deployed and kept operational?
Certainly. Let me go back and talk a little bit about what ICAO was trying to do and what the U.S. mission is trying to support. What we have put forth for discussion among the member states is a performance-based standard.
Right.
We are not prescribing any particular type of equipment. Why? Because, as you said, there are a lot of different technologies that meet this requirement. Not all airlines have the same, but they basically have the ability to track their airlines.
So if they have the question is making certain they use it. We had an aircraft with 239 people that had it, and it wasn't operational.
It's not that it wasn't operational. We don't know. The problem is we really don't know what happened with MH-370.
Oh, that's true.
But the fact of the matter is, what we believe is that it's not just the technology that we have to focus on. It's the technology and the coordination of the industry and the airlines and the air traffic control procedures.
But they weren't able to track the aircraft in a time in which we knew where it was when it went down. Then when it went down, we weren't able to locate the aircraft because is it the transponder, or what do you have there?
Well, go ahead.
What do you have there, Mr. Hart?
Yeah, this is the cockpit voice recorder, but it's pretty much the same.
Is that what pings?
As the flight data recorder, and yes, that is what pings underwater.
Okay, but we didn't know where it went down, and we couldn't locate it. It wasn't either operational or it didn't operate long enough.
And it is precisely because we don't know exactly what went wrong that we are not prescribing specific fixes. And what we're saying is,
I have to go back, Ms. Duckworth, all of us have to go back and say, when will there be some action by ICAO to institute something? I heard some different dates. First, I heard a date of later November this year, then I had November 26th. I heard another date of March. What's going to take place when, as far as some standards?
What is happening this week is that ICAO is sending out to its member states the proposal with respect with respect to the performance-based standards that we want to have implemented. That is going out this week. We expect comments back from the member states, and we're scheduled to take this up at the council level to make this formal in November of this year.
Not till November.
Not to November of this year. We have to get responses back. But in the meantime, we are not waiting on the formal responses to start an initiative to test out what will work and what doesn't work. It's not just the technology. It's how the technology is integrated with the processes that we have in place. And we're setting up an initiative in Asia that's going to be started late summer. FAA is going to be involved.
So we'll be well into 2016 before.
2015. Late summer 2015.
But well into 2016 by the time the standard is adopted.
No, November 2015 is when we propose to adopt the standard.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Yes.
I kept hearing 2016.
I understand your confusion because this is like light speed, so I get
Okay. And again, you said we're moving a lot faster than they have previously. Well, that's good. Okay. Well, that was my major question for you.
May I add a point to that, Mr.
Yes.
Chairman?
In fact, I was going to ask you again. Not only this short-term solution, we heard about data streaming as another solution, and global position satellites, which are soon, I guess, with Airline will be in 2017 will be in place. But Mr. Hart, could you tell us where we are there?
Well, as Ambassador Lawson noted, that we don't know why we stopped being able to see where that airplane was, and that's part of the reason why our recommendations included exploring ways to make the systems tamper-proof, because we don't know whether they failed or were turned off intentionally. But that's why we have our recommendations.
Yeah, so we don't know if it was a terrorist act. We don't know if it was mechanical failure. We don't know natural disaster due to storm or something like that. We really don't know.
That's correct.
And you told me, I think the other day when I visited, the long-term solution for identifying where an aircraft is the global network, where we are, and I believe Airline is about, which is the, Iridium was going to launch these satellites, and now Airline has 81 of them going up, and they should be launched by globally, 80, one of them, I believe, in 2017, and that would solve part of the problem.
That would aim at the tracking problem. We also would like to get more data so that if we lose an airplane underwater, we don't have to go underwater to find out what went wrong. So
Are you recommending
several
too?
aspects.
One of the problems we have is that usually the pinging device goes out after 30 days. Are you recommending that be changed so we'd have a longer period to search for these aircraft? Or
Yes, we included recommendations not only to increase the time from 30 days to 90 days, but also to change the frequency to a frequency that can be tracked for a much greater distance than the present than this pinger.
and data streaming are there existing tracking capabilities over sea and land to have data streaming work now, or does that rely on a global network, satellite network?
Sort of all of the above. The ability to track is very good if you can't turn it off. That was our problem with MH-370. We lost the signal and we don't know why. So that's one of the challenges was it turned off intentionally?
Okay. Well, that's interesting. But you could make changes to the equipment. I have know nothing about the technology that would not allow it to be disarmed or disabled.
Our recommendations have asked for the FAA to explore ways to make those systems tamper-proof. That's correct.
Okay. And you have a total membership in IATA of about 84% of the airlines globally. Is that correct?
Pretty close, yeah, 250 members.
And you can't really say that now. Malaysia Air was obviously a member.
Correct.
So I can't say that the problem is just among the 16% because here we've got an example of a sophisticated aircraft, a member of the highest level operation. I would consider your membership of airline operators, and we still have the problem. So we've got to And the only other thing is I understand there's some dispute about the size of the aircraft, the number of passengers. I think, was the proposal at 16 or something?
The proposal that ICAO is setting forth is that these rules would apply to any aircraft with more than 19 passengers.
19 passengers. Okay, very good. Well, most informative. Thank you all. Let me turn now to our ranking member, Ms. Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I know just enough about this issue to be of danger to myself and others, and I'm getting a little bit confused because, Mr. Hyatt, could you just address the different issues of just very briefly, the different transponders? You know, we're talking about, here in the U.S., we're going to ADS-B. I mean, I understand what you're saying about there's no need to spend more money on equipment if you already have something that's capable of doing it or that's redundant. I own a 1959 Piper Comanche that my husband and I bought. We paid more for our 2006 F-150 than we did for the airplane, just to give folks an idea of how old this aircraft is. And it was, when we bought it, fully, I mean, it was a sweet panel for 1972. It had Loran, it had all that good stuff. But there's still equipment in there. My six-pack is still perfectly good. I don't need to upgrade that into a glass cockpit. It works just fine. We did just now invest on ADS-B out in our NAVCOM. I guess what I'm trying to ask you is, all of your membership have some form, right, of ADS-B out, an extended squitter, 1090 ES, or something along those lines. Is that not correct?
Your analogy with your aircraft is very accurate, especially when you talk about Loran. I learned on Loran, but we're dating ourselves. Anyway, go back to your question. Your assumption is that, yes, all of our carriers do have a transponder. There are updated transponders that are now coming into effect, not to get too technical, but they will allow the ADS-B, ADS-C, which is contract information out. Now, not all airlines have the same equipment and the availabilities worldwide. If we think about in the United States, it's very sophisticated, but when you get into other regions of the world, it's not quite as sophisticated, and those airlines have adapted their operation to the region that they're in. So it dictates what type of equipment they would have on board.
So there would actually conceivably be airlines, say, throughout the Pacific Islands or throughout Asia that don't have a 1090 ES or some level of position, of a squidding position reporting system?
Potentially, yes, but most of them all have the transponder, but there's the transponder with the 1096 squidding availability that will be put into place that will allow you to take advantage of the ADS-C, ADS-B type operation.
Is your organization supportive, or are you taking a wait and see, or are you opposed to ICAO saying that, we should have that squidding capability in all aircraft that are carrying passengers in international water or international airspace?
What IATA is in favor of and is very strongly for our airline members is a performance-based approach, just as the ambassador had said. And that performance-based approach will allow us to develop what's the best in technology and utilize several different technologies. We're talking about ADS-B, ADS-C. We've also got other technology that's available, and what we want to do is make sure that there isn't a regulation that might come out that would specify exactly what you need, because you may be able to take advantage of better technology along the way.
Oh, I absolutely agree with you on that. But I think I'm speaking to a capability here. Mr. Ambassador, would it not make sense to have a performance-based standard that says that all aircraft that carry passengers, especially in international airspace, over international waters, as in the case of Malaysian Airlines, have some sort of system, whatever that technology is, that is capable of squidding, or that is sending out bursts, extended squidding, which is sending out bursts of position data continuously without having the aircraft to be interrogated by radar first?
That is exactly what we are proposing. The specific terms that you're using are not in the document that's gone out this week, but that's the concept, that you figure out what kind of technology you have, what kind of technology is available, and we coordinate the processes with the air navigation service providers and others to make sure that we in the search and rescue and so on and so forth, so that we all know how to work these things together. But that's exactly the process that we're embarking on at this point in time. That's exactly right.
And I don't know who would answer this, whether Mr. Hyatt or the ambassador. With military aircraft that would be launched or sent out there, I mean, your radar basically tells you where to go. So if you're trying to intercept an aircraft, for example, a non-responsive aircraft or something, and you're sending military aircraft in the U.S., radar would tell you where to go to find these guys. But if you're over international waters out there where you're in, I mean, none of it's uncontrolled, but do they have the capability of receiving the data in some of these aircraft in the military so that they can go find an unresponsive aircraft or an aircraft that's gone missing, as in the case of Malaysian Airlines?
You're talking about a level of analysis, a level of that we're not at yet.
Okay.
Right now, we're talking about getting everybody on the same page in terms of normal tracking and abnormal tracking, and you're talking about distress tracking at that point. We're working on all three of these levels, and again, it's a performance-based standard that we're trying to use, and we are going to utilize as the ambassador to the U.S. mission, I will do what I can to push ICAO to utilize all of these technologies and make sure that we don't leave any space uncontrolled, if you will, not controlled, but that we identified the various possibilities that you've identified, and say, what would we do in this situation? What would we do in that situation? The first such initiative, the first such test will take place in the summer of this year. In Asia, the FAA will be involved. We're going to involve IATA, NTSB. We're going to make sure that everybody who would have a hand in an actual situation has a hand in figuring out what the procedures should be. So the questions that you ask are the questions that are going to be asked. And hopefully we'll get some answers.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. You are back, Mr. Chairman. You've been very generous.
Thank you, Mr. DeSaulnier, gentleman from California, recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm slightly more dangerous, I suppose, than the ranking member, or maybe more, because I know really nothing about this other than the fact that I'm flying a lot more often, so I'm more concerned about this issue going back and forth from the San Francisco Bay Area almost every weekend. So, Mr. Hart, nice to see you again. I hope
Thank you. The pleasure's mine.
Yeah, well, it's mutual. Maybe it's like Claude Rains and Humphrey Bogart at the end of Casablanca. I hope this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. So it's as someone who's not familiar with the technology, but is from an area that is prides itself on new innovation, it seems to a layperson that it's sort of hard to believe that we don't have more refined technology. In January, you mentioned that it really shouldn't be, if I'm reading the question properly, to obtain critical flight data faster, you really shouldn't have the need for immediate underwater retrieval. So this is directed at you, but if either of the other panelists want to chime in. So are there constant technological improvements? Have these crashes, including the 2009 Air France Flight 447 crash, has this started to encourage or incentivize new technologies? And how close are we? You've mentioned near term, medium term, long term, maybe a little more specific as to how we get to the long term as quickly as possible, so you don't have to spend all these resources trying to actually get the box back.
Thank you for the question. The new technologies are developing rapidly. The issue, as you've already heard several times today, is the implementation internationally, because not only does it need to be approved by the regulators in the significant countries, but then they have to harmonize that so that the borders are transparent. So the challenge is getting 191 countries to agree to where to take this, and that's one of the reasons that we stress performance-based, because there are so many different scenarios depending on the situation.
I'll just add, Congressman, that the industry is very on board with looking at streaming data. And we do recognize, though, that the automatic deployable flight recorder will go into effect. But we also feel that the technology is moving so fast that it will help the NTSB and in accident investigation to have that streaming data.
And just in incentivizing from the private sector's perspective, are there liability issues? I mean, obviously, there's a goodwill and the confidence of the flying public, but are there other and things that are impelling more R&D to make the technology be deployable faster, or is it mostly just getting multiple different jurisdictions and countries to agree to the technology, as you just stated? Mr. Hart?
Well, it's some of all of the above, because the incentives, ultimately, the incentives are that as the technologies advance, they're going to help the airlines be able to operate more efficiently, and that through continuous knowledge back and forth. That's going to be ultimately a very strong incentive, but certainly getting everybody to agree is a major challenge.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Welcome and recognize Mr. Price. And Mr. Price, Ms. Duckworth, put your full statement in the record, but you're recognized for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the chance to sit in on this hearing today.
That's what I mean. I was very assuming the leadership role she has, and also, of course, welcome her back to the Congress. And I do appreciate your hospitality here today and the chance to ask a couple of questions. I know my full statement was submitted in the record. This statement reflects work that Representative Duncan and I have done for many years, and the two bills that address flight tracking and data recovery. The SAFE Act, which would require the use of deployable recorders, and the SAFE-T Act, which would much more broadly require FAA to take a close look at all the technologies on the table and develop domestic requirements in line with international standards. Ambassador, I understand before I arrived, you talked about the unaccustomed speed with which ICAO was acting on this matter to act post Malaysia 370. But I do have to note that this is not a new matter in this body, and the discussions have been going on for years, including discussions in your organization. At least since Air France 417, these discussions have been going on. Representative Duncan and I have introduced these bills multiple times. We've had report language in appropriations bills, most recently 2014, then again in the current year, encouraging the FAA to consider the costs and benefits of deployable recorder technology, to work with the NTSB to support U.S. and international initiatives in this area. So this isn't new, but fortunately it does seem to be reaching a heightened level of attention, and so hopefully we can sort through the different proposals and do something that actually makes a difference in something that does seem, to the layman, I think, seems just obsolete, that we cannot deal with these aircraft that go down that we never find in some cases, or in any case have these expensive, heart-wrenching searches that surely, given the technology we have and have actually deployed on some of our military aircraft, surely this isn't necessary. Now, I'm pleased to see that ICAO's tracking recommendations are coming in conjunction with or viewed as a complement, let's say, to automatic deployable flight recorders. That is a proven technology. I understand that you're currently moving forward to make the use of the deployable flight recorders a recommended practice. Is that accurate? And the timetable you gave earlier, does that apply to this recommendation in particular?
The recommendation that we have on the table is performance-based. Deployable flight recorders is included as a possible solution that would meet that standard. Currently, the letter that's gone out does not specify any particular type of technology, but that's clearly a part of the technology that we would expect to be implemented.
All right, that leads me to our other two witnesses, and since I have limited time, let me just explore this a little further with them, the complementarity of these systems. Mr. Hyatt, you actually stated that deployable recorders would be redundant for airlines that plan to implement real-time data streaming. I wonder about that. Could you clarify? Are airlines that use real-time data streaming transmitting exactly the same number of flight data and cockpit voice parameters that a standard or deployable black box is required to record for accident investigations? What happens to triggered data or real-time streaming if onboard satellite equipment suddenly loses power? Or if the aircraft loses its lock on the satellite? And then, Mr. Hart, of all the technologies being discussed, which ones work after the crash has occurred? Automatic distress tracking systems, real-time data streaming, deployable recorders. Clearly, that is available after the crash has occurred. It ejects on impact. It's right there. Does equipping aircraft with automatic tracking capability guarantee that it will provide the actual position of the aircraft after it goes down? You see what I'm getting at? What are the distinctive features and distinctive strengths of these different technologies? Are they in fact redundant, and in particular, what are the capabilities of the deployable recorders? That's obviously what I'm getting at, and I'd appreciate both of you responding.
The specific recommendation that we've made regarding finding aircraft that have crashed is that they, when in distress, are doing something that makes it possible to locate them within 6 miles after they crash. So there are so many ways to do that. We didn't specify specifically a way to do it. We just said we want to be able to find the aircraft within 6 miles of where it crashed so that we're not searching the entire Indian Ocean.
On the equipment and, as you would say, the redundancy, it would actually be duplicative in terms of the fact that we already know that the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder will remain on the aircraft. What we're looking at is the technology to harvest that information sooner in order to be able to analyze what happened in the particular event. Now, as far as locating the aircraft, streaming data is a byproduct of tracking and could be utilized by the airline itself.
That's the point, though, isn't it? Yes, the recorder's there, but the recorder's at the bottom of the sea.
So with the streaming data, it already starts to point to what's taken place while the recorders are being recovered. If you go back and look at the history on the Air France 447 accident, there was a lot of information that was harvested within the last really 20 minutes of that flight that helped to find out where that aircraft was, while unfortunately the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder were still trying to be located.
Yes, and what I'm asking you is are these kinds of data, the kind of streaming data you're describing, and the data that would hypothetically be available had the black box ejected and floated, are those literally redundant?
It would depend upon the parameters that we're actually required to provide to the authority, such as, in this case, the FAA, as far as the number of parameters that we would have tracked on the aircraft, which then goes back to the NTSB or the investigative authority as to the usefulness of the data. There are a certain amount of parameters. We've progressed over many years, as you well know, with going from basically 10 parameters that you're looking at on a 10 disk now to volatile data and all the other things that can be harvested. So there are the basics, and then there are those that are in addition to.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know my time's expired. The bills that Mr. Duncan and I have put forward certainly anticipate and would promote the consideration of this full range of techniques and data gathering methods. But I think we also obviously are motivated by a conviction that the proven technology that would instantly provide location of a downed aircraft, that there's certain burden of proof on those who would say they could replicate that or render it redundant. Yes, sir.
I just want to say that these are specifically the types of questions and concerns that I will bring back to ICAO throughout mission as we progress through our initiative and see what works and the procedures that are being in place. These are exactly the types of questions we're going to make sure that we get some answers to.
Thank you.
Mr. Price, just a question, if you deal, your proposed legislation that you and Mr. Duncan put together really is triggered by ICAO, isn't it? By ICAO action?
The short answer is yes.
Okay.
We've had these concerns for a long time. The National Transportation Safety Board in our own country for years has had this under advisement, has explored this, but yes,
But you still have to wait for them to.
We're latching on to the ICAO process.
Yeah.
Yes, that's true.
And one of my concerns is I was trying to get the time frame, and even if we get to November and they adopt it, I saw this document that came from the ad hoc working group from ICAO, and it says how long would it take for states, that would be the countries, and industry to implement this proposal. And then the chart says, see this 2 to 5 years, that's just aircraft tracking, and more than 10 years for ADT and ADFR. Is that accurate? I guess, that's their estimate. So even if we adopt it the end of the year 2016, we're looking at 2 to 5 years, 18 on to 2023 or something before this is implemented.
That is the current timetable that's in this document. We're at the beginning of this stage. We're at the beginning of this
Mr.
process.
Price, we still have a long way to go.
Well, let me just, in response to the way you put the question, though, our legislation does not depend on ICAO action. It's action that our country would take, and we've urged repeatedly our own FAA
Yes.
to move forward in considering this. But yes, we do anticipate conformity to ICAO standards.
Well, the other thing too is, we've got I guess they're all corporate members of your organization, IATA, and you have 250 members. What's your current standard? Because you don't have to deal with a cumbersome process of implementing. And you had a member, Malaysia Air, who obviously didn't have functioning equipment. We don't know what the reason was, or it wasn't operable, or it was made inoperable. What's your current standard? Can't you implement something right away, or have you, and what's your current standard?
Well, as I mentioned in my testimony, Congressman, we have the IOSA registry, which is a standard that every one of our 250 members has to abide by.
But now, was that before March of last year?
Oh, yes. Yeah, that's for...
And so they weren't complying, then Malaysia Air wasn't complying, or we don't know if they were complying?
We can't say whether Malaysia Air was in, quote, standard compliance or not, because we really don't know exactly.
Do you have any
what happened.
enforcement capability?
The only enforcement capability really is the fact that their name or their organization, if they don't make the standard through their biannual audits, would be removed from the registry, which also then results in them being removed as a member of IATA.
And we would have the capability of passing a law that mandates that FAA require this on any domestic aircraft or any carrier coming into the United States. I think we'd have that capability. Mr. Price, Ms. Duckworth, wouldn't you think?
Yep.
So maybe that might be a motivator. Do we have aircraft now flying in from your organization that are in non-compliance or non? You said most, not. I said almost all of the aircraft had the technical capability of compliance, and you agreed to that.
That is correct.
Okay. Are you aware of any that are coming in that belong to your organization that don't have that capability?
No, because...
So that if Mr. Price, Ms. Duckworth, and we introduce our bill that requires that any aircraft that comes into our domestic flight operations area have this equipment, that it be operable, and that it have certain requirements. Performance, you wanted performance. You don't have a problem with that.
Well, I'm not sure if I have when you say a problem, I'm sure my members would definitely raise their eyebrows on it, but we are.
It might be coming.
You
might alert them because.
Okay.
This is, I mean, when you go back now, and I love cooperating with ICAO, trying to get this in. They have 191 countries to deal with, all of them at different levels with different agendas. But we have an obligation to the American public. We're representing the United States. We also put 25% into paying for ICAO, and we need some certainty that aircraft, and usually we set the standard, and by the standard we set, the rest of the world usually complies, or they sure as hell ain't going to fly in. And we've had, I mean, we went through this with the European Union's emission trading scheme. They impose on us when we get to their border. They wanted to impose from our airport to their landing site in the EU certain restrictions and requirements. We sure as heck, I was going to say hell, but I'm going to try to keep it nice since you're my ranking member.
I'm an
Because my wife,
I've heard it all.
Okay, then but my wife always gets me. But we sure as heck can require standards for those flying into the United States if they want that. Right, Mr. Hart? You don't have to say, you don't have to approve the proposal, but you'd confirm that we have that ability.
I believe we have that ability. I'm not sure, but but the problem is not in the U.S. The problem is elsewhere in remote locations. That's where the problem occurs.
That's true, but again, we would set a standard for which we would hope the others would comply. And again, we can't assure everything in the world. We're trying to work with our ambassador. He's trying to work with those 191 countries. But again, we're looking at November, then we're looking at 2 to 5 years. I'm trying to speed the thing up. He's doing the best he can. And the other thing, too, is we haven't passed a resolution from the House or Congress, and I'm not sure if that would help any. I know we sent letters up to ICAO. We've met with the president of ICAO, and he's cooperating. But what we're trying to do is get this in place as soon as possible. It was interesting. It's always good to have some institutional knowledge, yes. But to hear Mr. Price and Mr. Duncan, well, we've been working on this for years. They're ahead of the curve, but we're not getting to the...
That's right, Mr. Chairman, and we've for years referenced the interest in ICAO and whoever else was working on this, but we've always anticipated that our country should lead.
I might say that I'll tell you today I may look at some legislation to move this forward. I don't, even if it's only for setting a U.S. standard, but we've always been the leader. We need to maintain that leadership role. We also need to help set the standard for the rest of the world. And there will be Americans flying on some of those planes around the globe. We can't guarantee all this in place instantly, but I think we can motivate and initiate action that will light a fire. Sometimes you have to do that. So that's the end of my questions. Madam Ranking Member, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just, I represent a district of manufacturers and small business owners, and I find oftentimes that industry can react far faster than governments can, and sometimes government does need to get out of industry's way and allow them to implement things that are going to be good for the industry and good for their customers as well. And with that, Mr. Hyatt, I just want to give you an opportunity to talk about your aircraft tracking task force and the near-term recommendations that you're talking about, that near-term aircraft tracking recommendations that you're saying, your organization is saying should be implemented even before the ICAO standards the new ICAO recommendations can be put into place. So can you talk a little bit about some of those recommendations coming out of the task force?
Sure, Congresswoman. We took a very detailed look at all of the options that were available in technology. There were over 27 submissions of different manufacturers in different areas of the world to tell us what they could do to track an aircraft. What we looked at in that sense was the fact of how soon any of these could be implemented. And it really got down to about literally 5 or 6 things that we could do as an industry right away with the aircraft and the existing equipage, as you went back and we were talking about the transponders and the squitter. But it could be, as I would say, and please excuse this word, primitive, as nothing more than a VHF or an HF voice communication to let the controlling entity know where you are. Now, the controlling entity be either the airline or the air navigation service provider. Now, technologically speaking, is that advanced? It's something that's been used for years and will continue to be used for years. It's still being used in Africa, and it's still being used in certain places in oceanic airspace. So with ADS-B, ADS-C, and then VHF capabilities, and then other tracking capabilities that come along with ACARs on board your aircraft, those are the ones that our members can actually take advantage of right now.
Okay. Well, I understand what you're saying about the low tech sometimes works out better. When we were flying in Iraq, in fact, the U.S. Army was using Blue Fort tracker, which is GPS based, which never worked, and that thing was just a dead computer taking up space in my aircraft. And we in fact use HF to communicate with each other all throughout the country, and something that has been around for a long time. So I understand. Mr. Lawson, Ambassador Lawson, forgive me. You have a thankless task. You are herding cats over there, and I understand what the challenges that you're facing. I guess what I want to know is, what can we do to be helpful to you as you represent the United States in ICAO to help push these standards further along, and what can we do here as members of Congress to assist you in the work that you're trying to do?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for the offer. This opportunity to express your concerns goes a long way. The United States is one vote on the 36-member council, but our influence is greater than that. And to be able to go back and tell other members of the council, tell the president of the council, the secretary general, that the intense interest of this Congress, of this committee, of your voices as to what needs to be done and what needs to be done quickly will go a long way. I am somewhat concerned about the possibility of kind of the balkanization of different rules that go beyond what ICAO requires in terms of international airspace. The United States has complete control over its own airspace, and we should continue to do that, and we will not relinquish that. But what we're talking about is as Mr. Hyatt said, flights over oceanic areas, over remote areas where this is where the danger occurs. And we're concerned about U.S. passengers who are flying on non-U.S. airlines. And ICAO has done a remarkable job over the years of focusing on its primary goal, the safety and security of worldwide civil aviation. And it's done a remarkable job at that. It is plodding at times. It is frustrating at times. And herding cats is a great analogy. But make no mistake, your voices are heard, and I will make sure that your voices are heard throughout the halls of ICAO. And that is a very good help to me.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Just finally, Mr. Hart, as I craft this legislation to move forward, let me ask you a question. First, you don't want to do things that impose a hardship on industry. One, equipment already exists with the transponder. Part of the problem is keeping it on. Is there a problem or great expense to enable flight recorder to stay on?
The challenge, thank you for the question. The challenge is not necessarily the expense. The challenge is that anytime you have a system that may go bad, you don't want that system's badness to infect the rest of the airplane. So that's kind of the challenge of making it so it can't be turned off. But yet we are moving in that direction because the FAA has certified recently various airplane designs that do have.
So if my bill says it has to stay on, they have the technical capability of making it stay on without great cost or possible issues of bad things happening.
We're on the learning curve of figuring out how to do that, and the big challenge.
So if I give them like a year to comply, they could probably deal with that.
I couldn't specify a time frame, but we are moving in that direction of.
The other thing too is to get more than 30 days. Pinger, I think when I was there, you said that there's a capability of making some adjustments so that they could have most of the existing equipment could have a longer transmitting life.
I'd have to get back to you with respect to that. I'm not sure of the answer to that. I know that we can make equipment that has 90-day capability, whether I can take this one and modify it to make it.
Can you give us that answer?
I'd be happy to get back to you.
Again, I'm not trying to impose something on industry that would be great cost. I would imagine, again, in a year, or we have 365 days, we give them a year and a half, whatever, to make those changes. But I'm trying to get from a technical standpoint what can be done. And if I impose it on those flying into the United States, their equipment, you don't want undue hardship or not putting something in there. Long term, though, is really global positioning, satellites, and that continuous streaming of data. And that won't be in place it's beyond 2017. I think their launch schedule is 2017.
That will take a while. I don't know the specifics on the timing of that, but that will certainly take a while, yes.
Okay.
And I'd be happy to get back to you with what can be done with the existing Pinger to extend its duration.
Okay. And then finally, I ought to voluntarily implementing your cooperative members' say latest standards or standards that would cover most of what we've talked about. What would be the schedule for that?
The current standards that we're talking about coming out of ICAO at the moment?
No, anything you could do to implement higher standards.
Well, we're encouraging our members now that if they've got equipment that is able to track aircraft, that they use it that way. But
you're just sending out suggestive memos.
It's coming through our committees that we put that information out to the.
Do you have the capability for membership to meet certain standards?
Well, they have to meet certain standards through the IOSA registry, as I mentioned. Now, we've got certain standards in the IOSA registry about flight following, but not flight tracking. So as we see.
Do you intend to adopt any measures?
We will then, as we see what comes from ICAO.
So you're going to wait on ICAO?
Well, it has to act in.
I've got to take my bill to do something.
Let me make one point. I know you want to get your bill in, and I understand that the urgency is there, but I'll say that, we operate over 100,000 flights a day successfully. And number two is we recognize that the leaders in the world, such as the United States, have great technology, and they will obviously require more. But we have members from all over the world, and what we do want to avoid is making sure that I don't have 5 or 6 or 7 different black boxes that are regulated by different entities all over the world.
And I don't want to do that. But right now, we do have one of your members who was flying an aircraft. It'll be a year ago next week. We don't know where it is. We don't know where 239 people are. It wasn't a second-rate aircraft or equipage. But something happened to deny us knowing where it is or being able to locate it. And this is 1 year later. It's almost. I heard Ms. Duckworth. She also, in her own way, said that I can't imagine being a family member. It's bad enough for the industry, but for people to not know what happened. And we should know, and every aircraft that carries that many people, I know the rule deals with 19, but passenger aircraft, again, and we can't maybe rule the world, we don't intend to, but we have some leverage over what comes in and out of the United States, and also the obligation to set the very best standard. So we'll look at that. I'll wait to hear back from Mr. Hart as we craft it. Did you have something to say, Mr. Lawson?
I just wanted to add a note that I applaud your approach, but it's not just technology that's going to solve this problem. It's the procedures that are in place with respect to the technologies that exist and that are going to exist, and so all of that needs to be coordinated.
We have a voluntary private organization that can adopt standards and maybe, and again, they have we won't know till we see what happened with 370, but we can take steps. They can take steps voluntarily. We can mandate where we have U.S. jurisdiction, you have to deal in a different venue, and we know you're doing your best. But even all that said, it's going to be years and years and years before we have this rule, and then we have the implementation of the proposal. So we're just trying to light a little fire, both by the oversight hearing that we're conducting, working with you, the industry, and the technical people, because the last thing you want to do, and I want to do, is impose things on industry that aren't practical or would impose great cost, inconvenience, or duplication. So, well, I thank each and every one, especially our ranking member. Just really pleased to have her back, and again, congratulations. Thank each of you for your testimony today. We will leave the record open. There being no further business before the subcommittee, this hearing is adjourned. Thank you.
Well, thank you.